Hello and welcome to Conversations with Olmsted. I'm Dee Dee Petri, President and CEO of the National Association for Olmsted Parks, the managing partner of the Olmsted 200 Bicentennial, marking the 200th birthday of Frederick Law Olmsted. Olmsted 200 continues apace. Please visit our website, olmsted200.org, so that you can take advantage of wonderful activities from coast to coast. In September and October, you will find a vast array of conferences and programs, not to mention bike tours, park visits, and virtual lectures. Harvard and Planting Fields and the Society of College and University Planners are all sponsoring important events, and you can find more on our website. As we've said before, Olmsted 200 is not about a single day or a single year or a single country. Olmsted 200 is an opportunity to initiate important conversations about the ways the built environment can advance social justice, equity, and sustainability. In that spirit, I want to draw everyone's attention to the announcement last week by the mayor of New York City to create a new linear park. And this is not the only new park that we welcome during the bicentennial. Louisville is growing its Olmsted Parks with the development of Beargrass Preserve, a new 25-acre tract of land adjacent to historic Cherokee Park. And Baltimore is creating a new public park, Hillside Park, inspired by Olmsted. We are grateful to communities across America and hundreds of celebration partners who are helping to expand the enduring legacy of Frederick Law Olmsted. In this year of Olmsted, there's no better time for cities to embrace parks and landscapes as critical infrastructure. Today, we're focused internationally as our speakers come together to explore how Olmsted's thinking can inform global park making and landscape design. In so many ways, it was Olmsted's visit outside the United States to Birkenhead Park in Liverpool, a rare public park open to all, that helped set him on his life's path of creating parks for all people. In May 2023, Olmsted 200 is inviting our friends to retrace Olmsted's footsteps in a special trip led by John Phibbs, Britain's resident expert on Humphrey Repton and Capability Brown. You can read more about it on our website, and we encourage you to register for a virtual introduction on October 2. Over a period of 100 years, the Olmsted firm worked or consulted in 8 different countries with nearly 100 projects in Canada and other work in Argentina, Bermuda, Cuba, Great Britain, Panama, the Philippines, and Venezuela. The Olmsted Bicentennial has welcomed international participation, and we have been honored to partner with Birkenhead Park, which celebrated its own 175th birthday this year, as well as Les Amis de la Montagne, which oversees Mount Royal in Quebec. Other international partners include the Scarborough Community Association, Historic Gardens Foundation based in London, and World Urban Parks. On our website, you can find articles with an international perspective, a glorious examination of Olmsted by Landscape Architecture Korea, blogs on Central Park and Japanese public parks, and an upcoming conference in Tokyo on December 11, 2022, featuring historian and photographer Sarah Cedar Miller. Yes, Central Park in New York was the forerunner of urban public parks throughout the world. And so today we look forward to exploring Olmsted's reach and inspiration when it comes to urban design and park planning. Special thanks go to Kong Zhen Yu, whom you will meet shortly, since it is 11 p.m. his time. Moderating our program is park expert extraordinaire Jane Miller, who is chair of World Urban Parks, board member of the City Parks Alliance, and principal of Jane Miller Consulting. Jane comes to us from Phoenix, where she is addressing the National Recreation and Park Association later today. When I say that Jane is a park expert extraordinaire, I am not exaggerating. She's been the leader of numerous urban park systems, including those in Minneapolis and Pittsburgh. And during her tenure, Minneapolis was voted the #1 park system in the US 6 years in a row by the Trust for Public Land. Jane will start off today by introducing the panelists and then open up a conversation. Near the end of the hour, she will also field questions from the audience, so we urge you to put them in the Q&A. With that, let me turn this over to Jane. Welcome to Olmsted 200.
Thanks, Dee Dee, and welcome everyone. How exciting it is to be together celebrating Frederick Law Olmsted's 200th birthday. Today, over 70% of the world's population lives in an urban environment. Against that backdrop, today's panel will explore how Olmsted's work and legacy can inform global park making and urban planning. The panelists and I are honored to be here with you today to talk about Olmsted's legacy from an international perspective. As chair of World Urban Parks, I'm pleased to serve as the moderator of today's session. I'm also thrilled to introduce three of the most thoughtful thinkers and practitioners around the globe who, like Olmsted, are exploring how landscape architecture can undergird the development of livable cities while addressing pressing issues of social justice and climate change. First, I'm pleased to introduce Rami Heck. Rami is a professor at the School of Architecture, Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile, where she offers courses and research seminars on design theories of 19th and 20th century landscapes. She holds a PhD in history and theory of architecture from Princeton University. She has been a visiting professor in the Department of Landscape Architecture at the Harvard Graduate School of Design and a fellow at Dumbarton Oaks Research Laboratory and Collection in Washington, D.C. This year, Rami compiled and edited Landscapes for the People, the first translation into Spanish of 4 essays by Olmsted, selected specifically for their ability to expose historical challenges of landscape architecture as a profession and field of study, a situation particularly applicable in Chile today. Now let me introduce you to Alison Barnes. Alison is CEO of New Forest National Park Authority in Southampton, England. She is a trustee and advisor to the National Park City Foundation. Alison also served as a member of the Forestry and Woodland Advisory Committee of Forestry England for nearly 10 years. As director for Natural England's London operations, she promoted London's green space and its benefit to the social and economic fabric of the nation's capital. As a commissioner of the London Sustainable Development Commission for 5 years, Alison advised the mayor on national environments and connection to nature in urban planning, where she initiated a project called Sowing the Seeds, designed to reconnect young people to green spaces. A graduate of Oxford University, Alison has advocated for the Green Halo Partnership to ensure that the natural environment is seen as an integral part of how we work and live. Welcome, Alison. And finally, I'm really pleased to introduce Kanjan Yu. Kanjan is a landscape architect, urbanist, writer, and educator. He received his Doctor of Design degree from Harvard's Graduate School of Design in 1995. He was elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 2016 and won the International Federation of Landscape Architects Sir Geoffrey Jellicoe Award in 2020. Kanjan has helped establish the profession of landscape architecture in China while focusing on urban development, land and water management, flood control, and ecological restoration. He is a founder of the Peking University College of Architecture and Landscape Architecture, and founder and principal designer of Turinscape, which has been called one of the 10 most innovative architecture companies of 2021 for balancing China's hyperspeed urbanization with green sponge cities. Gosh, what a panel. Welcome at Rami, Alison, and Kanjan. Yeah. Before we begin, I have one housekeeping note for our listeners today. If you have questions or comments, please put them in the chat and we will address them later in the session today. Panelists, I'm excited to begin our conversation about Olmsted's legacy and his international impact. While I have some specific questions for each of you, please jump in when sparked by something a fellow panelist shared. So here we are on the 20th anniversary of Olmsted's birth, honoring Olmsted's legacy. Why should Olmsted's work and ideas still matter today across the globe 200 years after his birth? Romney, let's hear from you first.
Okay, thanks, Jane. What an honor to join you, Alison, Kanjan, Didi, and all those who are with us via streaming, celebrating the one who brought us this improbable group together. To answer your question, I have to say that Olmsted's ideas, projects, and thoughts have had the ability to expose over and over historical challenges of landscape architecture as a profession and field of study, as you just mentioned, a situation that I believe is particularly applicable to the case of Chile today, subject to the vagaries of health, climate, and political crisis. Although in the last 4 decades, the discipline has achieved increasing visibility here, there is little discussion about the significance of landscapes as cultural entities, where human expectations, design propositions, and social political processes have determined outcomes that affect us all. And despite his longevity, Olmsted sticks with us thanks to his ability to enunciate the potential improvements that landscapes deliberately introduce into the urban context can bring about to the physical and psychological well-being of their inhabitants, even becoming symbols of collective identity, provided there is an institutional framework capable of overcoming changing cultural agendas, economic restrictions, and even populist decisions. And I could keep going, but I know we have more time, so I just want to land out those ideas at the beginning.
Rami, that's great. That's great to get the thought processes started and the conversation going about his legacy. Kanjan, I'm curious from your perspective, as you work internationally, you're focused in China, but why do you see that Olmsted's work and legacy really still matter today?
Well, it is first of all, it is a great honor to be able to speak to you. Jane, also we met 10 years ago, and I was able to visit many of Olmsted's design. I'm at Olmsted Park and his office in Boston. And I also was leading a group translating 13 of Olmsted texts. So I will say I'm quite, and myself is just so similar to his as a life. I was a farmer. I work in the farm, and at the time I was in China, I was at a faster speed of urbanization. So I think talking about Olmsted, you at least you have to think about 2 aspects. First, Olmsted idea and his project is touching the human essential needs. Okay, that's, as a human being, as a Homo sapiens, we are both social, cultural, and biological natural. So Olmsted work, the parks, is bringing nature back to the city at the time when it's fast urbanization, spread out of the buildings, and the people moving from rural to the city, to the urban area. And the Olmsted, I think it's so important. We need nature for recreation of a human body, human as a biological species. We need nature to get the energy, to get the fresh air, to get the physical exercises. And also as a culture, as a social group, we need open space. We need a public space. And at that time, public space, when in the United States, at that time, racial segregation was still a big issue. So the park is a public space, which actually you forget, yourself. You become everyone equal. You have a green space. You can just equal space. That's one thing. That's why I think Olmsted is eternal. Is essential for human being and for human society. Whenever and whatever human we develop our civilization, I want to make a reference for the movies, the fictions. The play number 1 is a play 1 movie. It's by Steven Spielberg, 2018. It was totally digital dystopia, gaming. People play game and totally forget the reality. But you know what? The ending of the game is actually the park. It is a winner of the Oasis. Actually, is ended up celebrating in the park. It's literally like a Central Park. So that's why it's eternal, it's essential for human being. Secondly, when we're talking about Olmsted, it was 200 years ago, from 150 years ago when he designed most of his project. At that time, China was virtually rural. We only have 10% people living in the city. Even back in 1995, when America have 65% of people live in the city, China will still only have 10% people live in the city, urbanized in the city. And so urbanization global-wise is virtually a new thing, actually. You know, when we talk about urbanization, it's just in the past 50 years. Global urbanization happened in the past 50 years. So Olmsted or United States or America is actually one or at least maybe 150 years ahead of the whole world. So his idea 100 years ago, 150 years ago idea is actually exactly what we need here in China. I will say in China began fast urbanization actually only in the late 1980s. So we only have 40 years, about 40 years fast urbanization from 20% of urban population. Now we have about 65% of urbanized population. So what Olmsted talk about is public health, is open space, is connected parkways. So the park movement is just happening today in China. So that's why I would say in these two aspects, for human being, for human civilization, his idea is essential. And for the rest of the world, Africa, India, China, Indonesia, Malaysia, we are on the way. We just we needed to build more parks. That's why Olmsted matter today.
Yeah,
yes,
absolutely. And you know, we all know as professionals how important it is, but what's so wonderful for every human being on this planet is how we each feel when we go into nature. That we can talk about it as professionals, but we can also connect it directly back to individual people around the globe and say, how do you feel? Do you get that feeling when you've been in nature? And we all know what that feels like, both physically, psychologically, emotionally. And so the criticalness for us as a species and our survival is so connected to nature. It's so, so true. Allison, you know, your work around the National Park City movement that started years ago in London is phenomenal. And I'd love for you to talk about how that work with the National Park City movement, particularly in London, but also the work that you're doing around the globe with other cities, how it's directly tied to Olmsted and his principles.
Thanks, Jane, and likewise, it's a real privilege to be here today, and thank you for the invitation to speak. Well, National Park City, I better clear that up first probably, because I suspect there's a few people scratching their heads about, what do you mean National Park City? But in some ways that whole kind of, what do you mean, is about reimagining cities, which I think is very much about what Olmsted, as I understand it, has given, you know, over these last 2 centuries. So it's about how could you see a city as a whole place? And again, I think Olmsted very much talks about whole landscapes, much like national parks are, but a place that is greener, healthier and wilder. So that's really the kind of concept where, and we'll talk probably a bit later about how we did that, but about, you know, national park cities as a concept, giving a habitat for ourselves, like you said, Jane, you know, those feelings, the need, the human need that Kongjian just spoken about. You know, how do we bring that forward? And we did quite a lot of exploring with citizens, which we'll probably talk about later, but, you know, what if, you know, for me, it was always, what if I could get lost in the city, in nature, but then I was reading about Olmsted and he said that before. So, hey, I obviously got it by osmosis anyway, this kind of feeling about connecting with nature wherever we are. And one of the other sort of things about our movement is that it's built on everybody being able to benefit and contribute every day, which I think is very much an Olmsted kind of principle about, you know, democratizing nature, I think you called it, but I think it is about, you know, everybody every day, and what does that kind of really mean in terms of design. So that, you know, the principles then I think that we really kind of chime with, that as I understand it, not being an academic on Olmsted as our esteemed colleagues are, but, you know, it's this whole landscape principle, the entire landscape, interconnection, formal and informal spaces, community spaces and gardens, as well as the parks. It's also about this democratization of nature, as I just explained, which was very central. But the third thing I think that really chimes with me when I did more reading on the subject was this utility trumping ornament, I think, is what Olmsted said. But for me, what I think that brings, you know, the idea that we can design a space, but the art and beauty of it is just not, it's nothing unless there's utility to it. And that feeling of experiencing something like, say, connecting with all of our needs. And I think, again, I think National Park City and its people focus is very much about that utility, although the word utility of nature is a bit jarring, but, you know, just having it there, trying to connect with our human needs and how we need to live going forward. So, yeah, I think there is a lot of synergy, but I think probably our movement and the way that it's actually basically, it has resonated very well across the globe, actually, with, you know, grateful help of World Urban Parks and Salzburg Global Seminar as well. I think it is a sort of, you know, it's of its time. It's a time where we need to refresh this. And I think anniversaries such as the 200th of Olmsted, you know, they are important moments to make sure we're not just on autopilot, forgetting, you know, these kinds of truths, if you like, which have been with us for a very long time.
Yeah, I would call the National Park City movement the modern Olmsted movement, really, is what it really is. Kamjan, you know, Olmsted embraced cities and urbanization in the late 19th century. You know, we find ourselves now in an urban planet. You talk about what the speed at which the transformation of that urban planet in China has happened. So I'm curious, you know, both because of your work specifically in China and what's happening in China, but also your international work, I'd love for you to share what you believe are the key Olmstedian principles that should undergird the development of livable cities today.
Well, I will say is that there's some, what he talking about the civilization, you know, civilizing the city. So what makes parks so important is to civilize the city. I think beauty, you know, number one, I will say is the values, the beauty. You need is what I'm talking about beauty is because what you value. So it's the beauty of the nature. He recognized the beauty of nature. Now he talked about how his father took him to the nature every year, and he feels just so much enjoyable, you know, and he brings the pastoral landscape back to the city. Now, I think beauty is not just superficial, it's a deeply rooted appreciation of nature. Now, that's why it's so important. It's so important when you value nature, when you love nature, you certainly take care of it, and because nature, the beauty. Actually, in China, we have no national religion. You know, and aesthetics is a religion. You know, it is a religion. So it is so important you how much judge, what make you beautiful. It's elevating, it's spiritually civilizing yourself and civilizing the city. That's why, and that's a Chinese saying that, I will quote the Chinese saying, the ugly, uncivilized people emerge in an ugly landscape. Now that's 1,000 years the Chinese saying. So that's why if you have landscape, you have beautiful landscape, which means certainly you need to define what is beautiful. Well, Olmsted define beautiful is pastoral, park-like, it's a savanna-like landscape. It's deeply rooted in human nature. Now that's why, and that's why creating such landscape, bring back to nature, bring back to the city, is so important to elevating human being. That's why civilizing the city. So that's, I think, we'll say is number one. So it's fundamental. Secondly, under this fundamental, you will say that city needed to be civilized because, because of the park. City can be civilized because of you have beautiful park. We have certainly seen so many ugly parks because we don't appreciate the nature. We just so, make Olmsted different from Louis XIV, from the previous gardening, is that he actually taken beauty of nature back to the city. That's why I think that's the fundamental. And the third is that he has so many principles of designing this kind of landscape. How to make it beautiful, respecting the nature landscape. Any piece of design, he actually respect nature's landscape. So the water, the climate, the situations, the existing landscapes, the principles of respecting what we today call ecology. There's no ecology at that time, but he always talking about how you select the plants to adapt to the soil, to the water situation, and he described how you look at the view and what kind of landscape it should be designed, related to the nature. So that's why I think number one, beauty. Maybe nobody agree with me, but I will say I put it first because it is touch human, deeply touch human body. And because you have seen this landscape, you civilize the city. And certainly you need to design with ecology, design with nature, certainly today's words. Yeah, I think that's a fundamental.
Thanks, Kangjun. And I'm going back to your very beginning when you were responding, saying there is no national religion in China. I would argue that nature is our religion, is our church.
Exactly.
So, promote that in China. Promote that in China.
Yeah.
Rami, in the wake of the pandemic, many cities have seen a significant exodus. I grew up in upstate New York and in the Adirondacks, which is the largest contiguous park in the United States, 6 million acres, protected in the Constitution of the state of New York. And they're so treasured. Boston, New York City is about 3 hours from the Adirondacks, 3 to 4 hours. And during the pandemic, people left New York and Boston and bought homes sight unseen in the Adirondacks to be in nature, to be in spaces that were safe, that helped them restore their souls. And I know that kind of exodus has happened in other parts of the world. I'm curious, just given your work that you do and your perspective, do you think urbanization is still inevitable? Because projections have shown that the population growth, the percent of humans that are going to live in urban areas is going to continue to grow and is going to be up in the 80th percentile, right? I'm curious if you think it's still inevitable, and if so, what are the critical components that cities need for them to be livable?
Hi, what a tough question, Jane, because I would love to say no, but I believe it is inevitable. And here we have to remember that we humans tend to live in communities that inevitable evolve into an urban one. And if we follow Konyang words, that could be an ugly or a beautiful process, for sure. And of course, we have here with us Olmsted once again to illuminate us, if you want, if I may say that. And I just want to refer briefly to his seminal 8070 discourse, Public Parks and the Enlargement of Towns, where he insisted on the necessity and the or the necessary massification, I have to say better, of the public park as a key urban piece to counteract the stress of city life and to offer a range of recreational spaces for the greatest number and diversity of residents. And I think that's a key, right? We tend to think about the human as one kind of person, but actually we offer a range, right? In terms of a lot of aspects. And to Olmsted, a city needed to offer public spaces characterized by their greenery, their attractiveness and accessibility, as well as by their capacity to recover the spirit and mind of all citizens. And you may say here that we can find that Olmsted activist in a way, right? Positioning the park as a medium capable of promoting and provoking urban improvements in its ability to articulate a sense of community. And I'm coming back to the beginning of my answer, and also to provide distinct and diverse recreational opportunities. And here I'm referring to Konyang again. And I think it's worth noting that this essay in particular, in case you haven't read it, it's a place where he also offers some clues to understand why we are so attached to permanently green landscapes, regardless of climatic conditions, availability of plant species, and specific cultural idiosyncrasies of the sites where they are located. Because we always need to refer to that religion, as you just said, Jane. We need to look over through our windows and just see something different. And I think we can still live in cities, but we can make them better. I know it's a cliche, but I think we have to remember him and those words and to really believe that we are different and we will always be, but we need to share some common spaces, and nature, landscapes, and specifically urban parks provide that. So
yeah,
that's it. Yeah.
Well, you know, I find it fascinating that, you know, this is the space we all work in, right? This is what we do. Yet those our human sapien colleagues know when that space is the right space, right? We know what it feels like when it's right, when it provides all those qualities that you and Kanjan in particular have talked about, and that you promote through your professional work. Even without having and understanding the history of Olmsted and what he brought forward, humans know what that space is and when they're in that kind of space and when they're not in that kind of space, right? We all know it. It's pretty amazing. So I am deeply appreciative, Rami and Kanjan, of the work that both of you do as landscape architects to create those spaces and advocate and train students to do that, because we all know what that kind of space feels like and how awesome it is. I'm going to shift gears a little bit, Allison, and talk about, we all know how essential parks are to the infrastructure for livable cities. And yet, I think we all know that city after city all over the globe has seen that parks have been underfunded, underappreciated, are often viewed as a luxury, non-essential. Police, fire, you know, roads, particularly in the US, get more money, right? And I'm curious if your experience, Allison, is that you see this mindset across the globe. And I'm curious also, if you do, how do we change that mindset? And how much do you think the pandemic and the explosion of people being in nature during the pandemic, do you think that will carry forward into continuing to make these investments in cities and make them be essential for leaders and elected officials who are making budgetary decisions, right?
Wow, what a question. I mean, I think, yeah, it's a mixed picture. I think when I think about, obviously I can focus in on what's happened in the UK, where after all, we don't have a huge amount of space in comparison to other parts of the world to kind of, you know, our planning system needs to get this right. I mean, not that it doesn't need to be got right elsewhere, but, you know, certainly in times of austerity, which we've all faced, you can see that perhaps there has been a little bit of attrition. There has been, you know, a reduced ability to prioritize the green space. I mean, I run a planning authority in my day job. You know, you can see some of the policies not quite bringing all those strands together in the best way possible. Although hearteningly, if that's a word, we have had a beauty sort of focus on our design policy coming out of government. So, you know, there are some sort of good signals, but, you know, that doesn't take away the lack of finance resources and pressure on spaces, like you say, for other uses. But I think on the upside, on the positive side, I do think that the voluntary sector, the community campaign sort of side of things is really vibrant and strong in many places. You know, how much I think we can all point to things that haven't happened because people have essentially expressed their love of their patch, which perhaps they, you know, they don't say on a normal course. It takes a bit of kind of pressure for people to come out and say how important these places are. And certainly where I work, I think that does make a difference. And I do think that things like, well, we have things like the Green Belt. I know it's controversial, but, you know, these things are important to people. And certainly the pandemic has really obviously refocused us on those benefits to our health and well-being, to our mental health, to basically carrying on the social and economic fabric of our world, really. And, you know, I think people have become cleverer as well at saying, you know, measuring, if you like, what that benefit is. You know, we call it, we've got a lot of studies here and a lot of baselines, certainly in my part of the world, around what we call natural capital. So actually this capital is part of our system of making decisions as much as our fiscal or, you know, social measures. And I think there's more and more practice out there of where this has been done, particularly when we start to face, you know, threats of climate and nature sort of decline, climate pressures. You know, these things become good decision-making tools and not nice to do anymore. So I think we are, you know, we need to continue to promote and celebrate the functions of these spaces for people, and use gratuitously the evidence that is emerging to make the case. And I think you're right, Jane, you know, we have been the advocates, we've been put in the seat, hopefully, of being advocates for these spaces. But, you know, our mission needs to be that everybody is an advocate. You know, whether they're a transport authority, an education authority, a designer, a planner, whoever we are, we're all humans who need, you know, the parks and the green spaces. So we've got to try and break down the dichotomies as well. Not the, you know, we can't be another one of these kind of culture wars, us and them sort of stuff. This has to be much more essential and much more systemic. I could probably go on about the pandemic, but, you know, we've started talking here about green recovery, or we've been talking about it for quite some time. And, you know, I've been doing some work local to where I am now in the New Forest about how that encompasses health and well-being, nature recovery, climate, also quality design and build, and also green skills and jobs. So this isn't about a bunch of landscape architects on their sort of hobby horse. This is about how these major strands of our lives can be supported by quality green space.
Yeah. So with that, Allison, you know, I think that you are spot on. And with that, I'm gonna shift to, you know, community engagement, you know, because really it is about the community. It's about our brothers and sisters advocating, not just us as professionals, right? So Rami, I'm gonna kind of put this on you to help talk about, what do you think some of the best ways to ensure really a broad base of community engagement when it comes to livable cities? And we all know that also it's complex, right? There's a lot of inequities around housing, park access, food insecurities, food deserts. And so how do we engage more broadly our communities to ensure these livable spaces are created, these livable cities are created? And can we also at the same time address these other inequities around park access, around housing, around food, right? Food security or insecurity, right?
Yeah, Jane, another great question to ask in Latin America, I have to say, and specifically in the city where I live, Santiago, right? Densely populated metropolis with about 6 million inhabitants, which is a third of Chile's population, occupying just about 200,000 acres. Nowadays, Santiago's landscape has turned, though, into a mere statistic, measuring socio-spatial segregation through greenery, where only 37% of the population has access to less than 33 square feet of, let's call, green zones per capita, right? While, and here's the big number I have to say, sadly, only for a 0.3% group of Santiaguinos, this can reach 200 square feet per capita or more, right? So this inequality is also manifest in that the greenery's maintenance requires expert management. I mean, or some basic aspects, right? Let's call that expert, with high consumption of an already scarce water reserve. You have to remember we live in a moment of a big climate, not just change, but permanent change, right? And as such, care in many areas is insufficient as its funding depends on the public coffers of the districts in which the tree-lined streets and urban forests or little parks are located. So when you talk about community, I have to give you the context because community also relies on that feeling that you mentioned before we can develop toward these spaces. It doesn't matter the size, right? But we need to create an attachment to those. And if we add that in 2020, after having to face both the driest winter season in 50 years and the spread of COVID-19, we know that, Santiago's nature canopies or historic canopies appeared equally threatened by the region's unstoppable growth and by a mandatory social lockdown and subsequent dereliction of green areas, leading to the trees fading, withering, and abandonment. So I love when Alison just mentioned about this idea of green recovery, right? Because it's something that we also need to think about. Because if I give you the context and such scenario, I think we can show or express the fact that Santiaguinos and Chileans and citizens of the world, for that matter, have forgotten that landscape production relies on the intentional leadership of cohesive institutions capable of overcoming cultural agendas, financial constraints, which are inevitable during the long period of historic development of projects of this magnitude, right? But it also reveals that when citizens are forbidden from using open public sites, the banning awakens a compulsive desire to do the opposite, embedding historic landscape with a renovated urban significance as a result, right? So I don't have one answer to your question, how do we engage community to do that, right? But I think we have to begin with the leaders, with the ones who are in charge, and who are the ones I think that have the obligation to provide some, I don't know, principles, right? To create some attachments, as I mentioned before, and also some connection with those places. But for us, the basic need is that we need some of those in front of us just to begin with, right? So
yeah. And I think about work and places that I've worked across the U.S. and leadership commitment to this is absolutely critical. It drives the agenda of an organization. It drives where money gets spent. It drives the conversation. So yeah, I think it's really critical. And at the same time, I'm going to shift to Alison because here's a movement in London with the National Park City movement, particularly in London, that I have been so impressed with how broad-based the community engagement, and that really the National Park City movement in London has really been very intentional and very much driven by everyday citizens. Yes, the leaders in London have supported it, but it's flipping that leadership piece on its head and saying, no, the broad-based community of London is going to tell you, leaders, how important this is. And I'd love, Alison, for you to share the work that you guys have done in London to build this incredible broad base of just everyday citizens to push the National Park City movement.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's been over a 10-year journey, Jane, so I will try to summarize. But I think, going back to leadership, the thing that leaders kind of hear are the voices of people, of communities. So I think, it's, we were very much in the sort of space of, well, how do we get those voices heard? Because, I certainly knew as a director for Natural England in London, that there were hundreds and if not thousands of community projects and engagements with nature on their doorsteps, and that not to mention all of the kind of, organized NGOs, organizations doing their own projects. But, how did you bring that together around the whole landscape? And I think this was a differentiating point really for National Park City, was about starting with people. So I call that demand for nature. So a lot of national parks, for example, is all about the supply. It's about the provision. It's about having space already and kind of describing it and then sort of saying it's important. Whereas I think National Park City is kind of trying to get that whole cycle moving together, where we're saying we're trying to illustrate and allow people to kind of express how they demand that, if you like, in their lives, that need, so this kind of what if, I could lose myself in nature, or I don't know, go for a swim in the Thames every day, or whatever it was for those citizens, we found lots of ways to help them kind of work together to articulate what a greener, healthier and wilder city would look like for them. And it was a movement that was founded by a really inspirational colleague of ours, Daniel Raven Ellison, first of all, sort of daring to suggest that a city might have anything to do with a national park. And then kind of looking with me and some others around this Sowing the Seeds report, which was very much about how young people were accessing what, I mean, London's quite a green city. There's like over 50% green and blue space, but hey, if most people aren't accessing that, then so what really? So we started to really kind of get under that skin of that together. There's lots on the website about how we did that, but things like Daniel went off on a walk around all the wards, a bit like a snail trail, round and round and round to all the wards. And, you know, there were also kind of community contacts in the network who gave presentations and essentially got the support of all, well, over a majority of the wards, basically, over this sort of 4-year period, really, or more than that, really, to the point where we could say to the mayor, actually, we've got the majority of people on board with this. And here is like a whole suite of projects that are going on to support this landscape scale approach. And, you know, we've got a vision that has been created through these engagements. And also we drew up a charter for the National Park City, which represented those kind of grassroots ideas. And the talismanic one of which is this: everyone in a National Park City is able to benefit and contribute every day. And of course, to achieve that, you have to have multiple points of active kind of, you know, of the active network, because, you know, the mayor can't make that happen and physically in every borough. It has to be about everybody across different sectors and organizations and communities kind of providing something together. So, you know, that culminated in 2019 and the mayor, Sadiq Khan, coming behind that, us meeting at City Hall, and Jane, it was wonderful that you were there, and signing that charter, including some of the, certainly my background, I'm an ecologist by background, you know, sort of the scary sort of scientists, you know, joking, but, you know, the IUCN, you know, people who actually do talk about this kind of engagement of people in their big set pieces. You know, I think HU1 is very much about engagement of people, so that there's that care for nature informing, you know, policy in a kind of that virtuous circle. But how you actually do that, I think, often escapes those big sort of conventions and you know, and I think you need something like a grassroots movement, which again now has, you know, it's been translated into what we call the Journey Book, and other cities are picking that up. And Adelaide became the second national park city, I'm delighted to say, earlier this year. You know, that this can kind of top down meets bottom up, so that we can kind of get momentum and energy into that system. I hope that kind of all made sense, but, you know, to be honest, it's a very energizing and, you know, I think a very important way of looking at things, this kind of demand for nature and how you harness it.
Yeah, and you know, you're right. It's been a 10-year journey. It's been incredible. And the work that Daniel has done to just create this space and this energy in London, it's been phenomenal. So I encourage people to go to the National Park City website to check it out. I want to make a shift. I know we're getting close to the end of our time, but I want to, you know, we've talked about, you know, how important this space is, how to fund infrastructure and creating new spaces. We've talked about community engagement, but we haven't talked about climate change. And we all know what a really significant global problem that is for our survival as a species and for the survival of this planet, right? So, you know, Kunjan, I want you to talk a little bit about it from a planning perspective. You know, is green infrastructure the solution? You know, are there places that are doing green infrastructure really well? Are there other solutions for us as we continue to expand green spaces in cities in particular, or transform things so that we don't kill our planet and we don't kill ourselves, right?
Yes, I think it is for landscape architecture, it's a third wave. We have the first wave is when Olmsted designs a park, bring nature to the city as a counter action to the urbanization or industrialization. So in 1950s, we have this environmental crisis. It's the DDT and this disappear of species and pollution. So we come in Manhattan, design with nature. We have think about how protect nature at a regional scale. Now we have the effect of urbanization and industrialization at a global scale. So these will have a new opportunity for landscape architecture to actually transform the whole globe, to transform the gray infrastructure into green infrastructure. I just at my hand, I just saw so many books today. Just a few days ago, I got Why City Need a Large Park by Richard Murray, and I have another book, Landscape Architecture for Sea Level Rising, right? For sea level rising, and I have also my own theory called a sponge city, yeah. Now, under the English the Architects Association called everything need to change. Everything need to change. Architects talking about. So that's the third wave. That's the third revolution that for landscape architecture take to transform at a global scale. Now, from the city scale to regional scale to today, we have to think a global scale. We need infrastructure, and we cannot depend on the gray infrastructure, the concrete, the steels, the chemicals. Remember New Orleans, which just collapsed. All this failure of the industrial technology is a failure global-wise. You know, the last year Zhengzhou and the German all failed. Hundreds, 1,000 people just died overnight. So I will say that we need a green infrastructure or landscape as a nature-based solution, as a nature to transform to the cities. So we build upon the great infrastructure, dams, channelized river, the flood walls. Those are just fail. We know that's a failing global-wise. So I think that's the time for landscape architecture to think, how can we plan ecological infrastructure at a regional scale, at a national scale, and even at a global scale. If Olmsted was today, even if Olmsted lived today, he would have think about that also. Now, he already talked about climate adaptation. We are talking about Cleveland, the Metro Park, and there's the Emerald Necklace in Boston. He did it with the Muddy River system. He gives more space to water. Remember, you know, he designs the infrastructure along the waterway, along the coastline. It protects the marshland, it protects the lowland. Now, those are just for us today to just pick up and expand it and put up to adapt to this dramatic climate change. So I think that's today's. We have to upgrade the idea. How can we create a landscape as infrastructure, a green infrastructure, as alternative to those concrete gray infrastructure, and to know how to plan this. We have the tool already. We have the tool already, and the only thing is that we just go forward and make it really work. Now, in the past 20 years, we did in China. We create a sponge system and propose create from gray into green. You know, we build about 500 projects that's really at the coastline, around the river, and inside the city. Solves the problem of urban inundation, the flood at regional scale, and even adapt to this sea level rising through mangroves, through the coastal landscape, and
right.
so on.
All right.
I think it's the right time.
All right, very good. And you know, I just feel so honored to be moderating this conversation with Allison, Kanjan, Romy. You guys are all doing impressive, incredible work, and I can't thank you enough. And I'm going to turn it back over to Dee Dee to close us out for today.
I want to say thank you to everyone. It has been a fantastic conversation, and obviously we could go on indefinitely. And I want to also send a special thank you to Kangjen and Romy for their translations of Olmsted landscapes. That obviously is very great news. And I want again to invite people to olmsted200.org, where you will see a very active national calendar and opportunities for you across the from coast to coast. We will come back to you with this conversation in December. Watch your inbox for more information. In the meantime, please remember that our exhibit, Olmsted Landscapes for the Public Good, is now available to you in Spanish. And I want you to check out our international partners, including World Urban Parks, Birkenhead Park, and Les Amis de la Montagne. It has been great to hear from all of you, moving from the sublime to the ridiculous. Halloween is coming, so do not forget to get out your Olmsted Halloween mask. You can find that resource in our student section of the Olmsted website. And we hope that you will send pictures when you trick and treat. So again, thanks to everyone for joining us today. It's been a fantastic conversation, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.